Hello, boys, and welcome back to the Trough.
Beefaroni's fun to eat.
Beefaroni's really neat.
Beefaroni's quite a treat. Hooray!
Yippee! For
I
beefaroni!
can't take it anymore.
This week, I have two books for you. I have Gates of Fire. This is a epic novel on the Battle of Thermopylae, or, the movie 300. It's that. And then I have one on General Wrangel, Russia's White Crusader, and this is about the a general of the Russian nationalist forces when the Russian Red Army, the Soviets, were fighting for control against the Russian White Army, the nationalist or Republicans, anti-communists, right? This is just going to be an overview of both books. I'm going to use spoilers. Do I recommend them? Gates of Fire is a pass from me. I'm going to get into it. I still wanted to talk about it, and these were two kind of war books, so I thought, I'll still talk about it. But I would say maybe check it out from your library if you're interested, because there are a lot of people that have read it and really enjoy it, so maybe you will too. But I would suggest maybe go to the library first, try to, get a free copy that way. And unfortunately, I just checked last night, but the people that published General Wrangel, Russia's White Crusader, written by Alex Wrangel, Wrangel's youngest son, I believe his youngest son, Tsar Press, they are no longer on Twitter, which is how I contacted them to get a copy of this book. And it seems like they were suspended for something, quote unquote. I don't think they did anything wrong, but you know how these things kind of go, right? So it looks like they're gone from Twitter, and I've been looking around. I cannot find them anywhere. So I feel like this has to have been like fairly recent, or I don't know, maybe a few weeks ago, something. But if anyone knows what happened to Tsar Press, let me know, because unfortunately, I don't have a way for people to get their own copy to read it, right? Which is kind of gay, but I still want to do the review. So that's unfortunate. And when I go on Amazon to take a look, it's like you do find General Wrangel by Alex Wrangel, but all these copies are really old and they're like over $100 where I think I paid maybe like $20 or something for this copy. So that's not ideal. There is the Always with Honor book, Memoirs of General Wrangel, and I have read that. I liked that as well. I would say maybe I would put this one, Russia's White Crusader, above it a bit. There's more information in there, more points of view and everything, whereas Always with Honor is obviously just the memoirs of General Wrangel, so it's really just from his perspective, really. That's unfortunate. That's an unfortunate turn of events where the two books I'm reviewing, one of them is not really a recommendation, and the other one I do recommend, and I don't think you can buy it anymore. We're just going to hop right in. We're starting with Gates of Fire. And as I said before, this is not a recommendation, but this is about the Battle of Thermopylae. And that might be a little misleading because maybe 15 to 20% of the book, if that, the book is a little shy of 400 pages. Maybe 15, 20% of the book is actually about the battle itself. A lot of it follows the fictional account of a man named Zeno or Xenophanes or whatever. I'm not great with the Greek names, right? I'm just not, so I'm going to screw that up a lot. We play around with time a lot in this book, and that's something I also didn't like, where at the start of the book, the battle has just ended, and the Persians have found one wounded man amongst the remnants of the Greek forces, and this is Zeno. And Xerxes has this man healed and tended to by his doctors so he can tell him the story of the Spartans, right? Instead of just telling us straight about the Spartans, it's really a lot about Zeno's backstory and all of that. And it's just so much irrelevant backstory, like completely irrelevant for our narrator. And the thing is, while Zeno is our narrator, he's our guy, he's always on the periphery of events. He's never like super directly involved, because even when he's in Sparta, he's not a Spartan, he's not one of them. And since he's not one of them, he's not like typically directly involved in like conflicts there with the other characters who are Spartans and all of that. I will say overall, I found the book to be very easy to put down, which is not a good thing. I was never super excited to finish it, but I had a friend that really recommended Gates of Fire, so I wanted to give it a shot. I wanted to finish it, and I kind of knew by like page 100, like page 140, I'm like, nothing really interesting has happened. Like nothing that's really like drawn me in has happened. I found the writing to be fairly long-winded and kind of trite, and it's boring, it's slow. There's some parts I thought were okay about Zeno's backstory, but ultimately it was just, I think I would have just liked a straight history book. Like, here's this really historical account with a bunch of references about the Spartans and then the Battle of Thermopylae, right? And I think that book would have been maybe like 200 pages or something. Something like that, or just like a more interesting fiction book, right? You know, one of those two things I would have liked. There's also a lot of Greek words that are just kind of peppered in, and I don't even know if peppered in is the right word. They appear often, and sometimes they're okay. Sometimes it's like interesting, like learning more about Greek words and all that. There was something cool on page 113 where Spartans put on these wooden twig bracelets tied with twine, and each makes they make them for themselves, and it's to identify their corpse after the aftermath, you know, if their corpse is unrecognizable. And then they like write their name into it twice, one on each end of this little twig, and then he breaks it down the middle, and then you leave one half behind and you carry the other with you into battle. And you know, these are like old dog tags, and I'm like, that's really cool. If that's real, that's like insanely cool that they had dog tags. Like, that's awesome. Like, stuff like that is cool. But 80, we talked for hours in secret on the pursuit of esoteric harmonica, the state of self-composure, which the exercises of the phobologia are designed to produce, as a string of the kithara vibrates purely, emitting blah 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 musical scale. I don't care. Beyond esoteric harmonica lies exoteric harmonica, the state of union with which one's fellows, which parallels the musical harmony of the multi-stringed instrument or of the chorus of voices itself. And it's just that's a little sample of some of the writing, which I do not think is great. And it's like, if you cut all of the Zeno stuff, if you just completely cut him as a narrator, I think the book, it's like you can trim like 200 pages, man, of like kind of a uninteresting, boring character with a backstory I don't really give a shit about. Like, that's 200 pages, easy, gone, done. And the book is much shorter if you do that, and I think more focused and more interesting. Something else. Sometimes, like, it'll almost be like a movie where, like, a character will reference, like, an event that hasn't happened yet. Zeno is talking with Xerxes and some of Xerxes' advisors, and they reference an attack on, like, a night raid that was done on Xerxes and obviously failed before the battle was finished. While in the book, like in the tale he's telling, like, they're not at that part yet. Like, the battle has just kind of started, right? They're like at that part, and then it's like 50 something pages later where they're actually doing the night raid on Xerxes, and you're just kind of like, why? Like, why bring up these events much further than when they occur in the book? I don't really get it. I don't know, maybe it's supposed to be exciting, like, I'm going to keep reading. It's like, I don't know. I was forcing myself to keep going because Zeno's backstory, which is very long, it's a very long backstory. He has like a tie-in with the god Apollo, right? Like Apollo appeared before him, and I don't think he really did much that was like worthy of a god appearing before him. I don't think he really did anything good because it's not like he really protected or cared for his cousin. Not really, because like his cousin had been abused, and she has an okay-ish ending where he's in love with his cousin, but they don't get married. She goes off to Athens. He goes off to Sparta, right? And she's like now a priestess of this like goddess or something. And it's like, well, at least she's away from her abusive husband. So it's something, but it's like, I mean, he's there at the Battle of Thermopylae, but he's not like one of the big killers. He's not one of like the really strong warriors. So I don't know. I don't know if he's like worthy of a god kind of a deal. He's just kind of average and eh. And there was like some stuff that was brought up that I thought was really interesting. Like apparently Sparta has like two kings that rule at the same time. And like in Xerxes' camp, they have a former Spartan king, like a Spartan king who's living in exile with Xerxes. And I'm like, tell me more about that. Like that's really interesting. Can we have more information on that? Like that sounds like a story. That sounds like a book, right? We don't get that, Instead, we get more stuff on Zeno or our large cast of characters. And like I don't think our cast of characters is like terrible. Like I think some people might say it's like wooden, or they're just kind of like your basic soldiers. And I'm like, I think that's fine, but they're also not incredibly deep, right? And I don't think they have to be, but I didn't really like, I don't think I need much to like or enjoy characters and like who are just like brothers in war. But I didn't really love or feel too interested in any of them. Like, I don't know. I just didn't really care overall. And I think maybe that was probably due to the pacing. And if we just cut out Zeno and then we can focus on like these band of brothers, that are fighting together, that would have been better. But instead we're removed. We always have Zeno kind of in the way between us and these Spartans, right? Zeno is just an obstacle, and if you just cut him out, much better, I think. And the book just kind of ends, the Greeks end up defeating the Persians, and like that's really impressive. I think like just the battle after Thermopylae is like really impressive, but it's also like Thermopylae is necessary, as a symbol for the Greeks, and it's a lot more than the Spartans that are just there. I would say like it's been years, but I remember the movie 300, and I'm like, at least that was fun, not historically accurate really, but it was kind of fun, right? Maybe I'll watch that again. I should have watched that for this review. Ooh. Some of like the Greek words and delving into like Greek and Spartan life, that's interesting as hell. We also have a lot of boring backstory and like a hyper focus on like unimportant Greek details. Ultimately, it's not a recommendation for me. The book just ends, and I don't really give a shit when it ends. On to General Wrangel, Russia's White Crusader. I want to apologize again because I swear to God, Tsar Press was still active on Twitter, which is how I contacted them to get a copy of the book, but they are gone now. So I don't think there's really a way to get the book. I would not recommend spending the buku money on Amazon to get an old copy. Fuck that. So maybe just hang around. They might pop up again, right? We'll see. Kind of in like this scene. I never really known a lot about like the White Russian Army or like the battle against the Soviets. I just, you just know that the Soviets win and the Russian nationalists or anti-communists are defeated, right? But a while ago, I read Always with Honor, and that was the personal memoirs of Wrangel, and I liked it a lot. It gave me a good amount of information, and it made me more curious. Like, I want to read more. I want to know more about the White Russian Army. So I've been meaning to get a second book, and then I saw Tsar Press, and I'm like, hey, that's perfect. I'm going to check them out. I also saw a Russian movie called The Admiral. I think this was about Kolchak. It's been like a long time since I've seen that movie, but I think that is about Admiral Kolchak, who was a White Russian general. A few things that I think makes this book a little better than Always with Honor, but now that Always with Honor is kind of the only option, I think that's worth checking out if you haven't, is you get more details from more POVs, and you have like Wrangel's extra time in the Russo-Japanese War. Now I'm just going to kind of flip through some pages that I had marked down, talk about interesting things. It's kind of interesting on page 46, there was a 1905 revolution that broke out in Russia. And it says like there was this event where 30 people were killed during a manifestation in St. Petersburg in 1905. Apparently, in 1920, during worker strikes, 200 people were gunned down in Manchester, England. And in the disorders in Paris in 1934, some 800 people succumbed. And, like, that's really interesting and, like, really fucked up. Like, I can't imagine 800 people being killed like that, or just 200 people being gunned down today. Like, it's just insane to think about. Something I wanted to talk about on this channel, I might do a video at some point, I don't know too much about it, is the bonus army. And this was apparently during like the Great Depression, and some like World War I veterans marched on DC, I think, and they were just like gunned down and brutalized by the army. And it's like insane. And it's like MacArthur was there, I think maybe even Patton. Maybe I'll talk about that sometime. Wrangel ends up being the Tsar. The Tsar's impressed with him, and he makes him an officer in the Horse Guards. We get some information about Wrangel. You know, he's doing well in World War I. He's decorated with the St. George's sword, and he gets promoted a few times, and things are just going good. The Tsar is obviously removed from power. On page 72, Lenin and Trotsky move in with the communist dictatorship. By October, they had succeeded. Kerensky fled. General Krymov, Wrangel's friend and former commander, had marched on St. Petersburg to effect a putsch on General Kornilov's behalf. On the way, he had stopped, hesitated, and asked for another conference with Kerensky. Returning from it, he had shot himself. His last words were, "I love my country too much." And it's just, everything's kind of crazy because you have the Tsar abdicate, you know, and like there's not another like Tsar there, and it's like people who, like Russian peasants who view the Tsar as like the manifestation of like God's will on earth. It's like, and like, you know, he is the symbol of like law and order and everything. Like their entire civilization is based around this hierarchy, and that is annihilated overnight. And it's like everything is in chaos, you know. It's good. Like, yeah, I think I'd like another book that's more like just focused on like the average Russian and their point of view on like the war and like, yeah, just kind of their lives and all that. Here's a story that we had in Always with Honor, but it's Wrangel is rounded up. You know, he's not a part of the White Army yet, but he's rounded up with some other people, and they might be executed by the communists, and his wife will not leave his side. So she stays with him as they're like in this jail cell, and people are dragged out of the cell throughout the night and killed. But it's a good little story, you know. She won't abandon him. Page 80, Wrangel presents himself to General Denikin, right? Who he doesn't really know, but Denikin is like a Republican. He is not like an aristocrat. Like the Wrangels are aristocrats, right? So he meets Denikin, who is head of the White Army. It also seems like this Admiral Kolchak is a part of like another army group of the White Army, but they're separated. I'll get into that later. That's a point I have for later. They're just kind of forming up, you know, and Wrangel's like, what are you going to do, or what can I do? And he becomes like a commander. And one thing that I thought was interesting is that they don't obviously have as many men as like the Soviets do. Like the communists have like a infinite supply of men they can draw upon. So Wrangel decides to fill like his ranks with prisoners, right? But they do make a point to kill the officers and NCOs, but the rest of the men they press into service, and apparently they serve like pretty well. Like they're pretty decent guys and loyal. A lot of them apparently stuck around until the end. Page 92, something interesting was Wrangel talks about riding over to the German colony of Johannsdorf. And there's a little footnote here. German settlements in the south of Russia dating back to the days of Catherine the Great. I have no idea what that means. I know nothing about Catherine the Great or like German colonies in Russia. That's interesting as hell. I really want to know more about that. That's interesting. I have no idea what that means. Wrangel kind of identifies himself with his Cossacks, and Cossacks they're Russian Orthodox guys. Wrangel also has like some, they're like Muslims in the Caucasus or like the Caucasian mountains. They serve under him, but the Cossacks are like Russian Orthodox Christians. I think ethnically Russian is, yeah, they're ethnically like Russians, I guess, or I don't know. It's a little confusing for me, like around that area, because I know there's some Muslim groups there, and then just like steppe people who are Europeans. Page 110, though, I like this scene. In one of the liberated Terek Cossack villages, Wrangel was talking to a few young boys, all carrying rifles. He asked what they're up to, and they say they've been killing Reds. because there are lots of them hiding in the marshes. And I bagged 7 of them yesterday, one of the kids says. And his reaction is one of horror. Never during the whole Civil War did the whole horror of that conflict strike me so forcibly. Good. On page 111, because like the White Army is like has a lot of victories at the start, and Wrangel's definitely a part of that, where they're doing really well against the Reds. But Denikin comes up with something called the Moscow Directive, and that means everyone just rushes Moscow without really like much of a battle plan. It's just we're all going to fan out and we're going to go towards Moscow, and once we have Moscow and the Kremlin, we have the war. And it's kind of like Hitler's plan, and probably even like I think Napoleon's plan as well, which went super well for all of those guys. But Wrangel wanted to head towards Tsaristan, later called Stalingrad, and still later Volgograd on the Volga River, to join another White Army under Admiral Kolchak. Apparently, Admiral Kolchak's army started in Siberia, and I guess just because of how massive Russia is, a lot of these White armies are acting like very independently from each other, and like, because I don't know, but Denikin just abandons Kolchak's army. He abandons Kolchak's army to its fate and its defeat, and like that just also seems insane to me that you would just abandon like fellow White Russian guys. But I guess it's like a loose confederacy of people who are anti-communist, but like I don't know. But a problem from that is once Kolchak's army's defeated, now the Soviets free up all those battle groups, so then they can press the other White Russians, But the White Russians do have some allies. They're international allies. It's like RAF, British Volunteers. They also have, I think, a few Americans, some New Zealanders, and, they're fighter pilots, even though they don't have a lot of planes. But I thought that was kind of cool. It kind of reminds me of Mine Were of Trouble by Peter Kempt. That's a story about this British guy who goes to fight in Spain during their Civil War, and he fights for Franco and the fascists. But Wrangel is sent to take care of Tsaristan, right? So he starts fighting for Tsaristan, which will later be Stalingrad. The battle's not going great. They lose a lot of people because they don't have the correct reinforcements and all of that. And the enemy has just a lot more men and everything, equipment, everything, right? But they're doing their best. Page 138, Tsaristan, the Red Verdun, had fallen, leaving 40,000 prisoners, 40,000, 70 guns, 300 machine guns, several armored trains, and huge supplies. The march to Tsaristan and its capture covered a period of 40 days. On the morning of the 19th, Wrangel entered Tsaristan and went directly to the cathedral, and they have this this big celebration, and Denikin even arrives. Wrangel and Denikin, I'll get into them more later on. They don't have the best relationship, but it's this really nice scene. But right after this, Denikin says, hey, we're going to Moscow. This is the Moscow Directive. And it just, like, Denikin is so self-assured, and he's completely neglectful of the enemy and, like, their just capabilities. And it's like, it's just crazy because it's like, if they had just, we can do this all day of history, but like if the White Army had just won and they just annihilated communism there and then, like, oh my God, it's like, how can you be that retarded, where we're just going to throw everything at Moscow and it's just going to work? It's suicide, and they just don't have like the men or the capabilities of marching on Moscow. But Wrangel writes Denikin this letter on page 147, and Denikin views it as nothing short of a breach of discipline and a way of discrediting him in the eyes of the army by divulging the letter's contents to other senior commanders in the form. He kind of views all of Wrangel's criticisms towards Denikin as inflammatory and just trying to make like a play against him. And Denikin writes a response which is like really harsh, and it includes personal and disparaging allusions against Wrangel. And Denikin also has a intelligence agency called Osvag, and something about Osvag is they're not great. They're not really good at their jobs. and Colonel Seminitsky, one of its chief officers, turned out to be a Red Army agent who later defected to the Soviets. So that's great. Denikin is not the best, it seems like. I don't know. Maybe there's another point of view on it, but he seems like kind of a moron. And Denikin wants Wrangel to take over the volunteer army, Moscow, which is just really bad because then they kind of realize it too late where it's like, holy shit, this is not going to work. This really isn't going to work. We're in so much trouble. We got to get out of here. The White Army's disastrous retreat. And even when he's like being given control, it's like yanked away again when he's trying to like set up a like fortification at a city so they have something to retreat to. He and Denikin are fighting, and then Wrangel asks to be relieved from duty. They talk about the disastrous evacuation of Odessa, where scenes of nightmarish terror and disorder range from mass suicides to women and children being trampled to death as they sought to scramble on board the departing transports. General Schilling blamed for the disaster. And like there's this like little band of like, or not even worse, but someone called Captain Orlov puts together a band of armed deserters, malcontents, and bandits. And he issues this proclamation where they want General Schilling dead because of everything he did wrong at Odessa, and he wants Wrangel to be the leader, but Wrangel doesn't want anything to do with it because these are like, I don't know if I'd say anarchists, but they're like third option kind of guys. In Always with Honor, they touch on the Odessa evacuation, like that disaster, but it's just like a footnote. You know, it's barely touched upon, and I'm like, how bad was it? Like, how bad was this thing? Because it seems pretty horrible, and like if a whole like group of malcontents form over it, it must have been like really fucking bad. But I don't know, it's not touched on. I think I want to do more research on that. The leaving Odessa. And Denikin's still like a little passive-aggressive bitch. He writes on page 182, "May he forgive you now for the harm you have done to the Russian cause." And that's referring to God. And it seems like a lot from Denikin is just, some of it is like insecurity because Wrangel is a aristocrat and he is not. He was born like, I think, rather impoverished. And I don't know, just like just can't really like admit when he's wrong. You know, he can't like defer to people who know what they're doing, even though Wrangel doesn't seem like he wants power. Like he had the option to take power, I think, a few times, but he always turns it down because Denikin's in charge, but Denikin can't really trust him. And Denikin calls a council of war to announce his resignation. This is after Odessa, and like the army is trying to reach Crimea, and from there, you know, just try to regroup a little bit. But it's like they're at their absolute low point now. The British, who had been like friendly with the White Russian army until this time, there's now a change in that, and the British want the war to end, and they think the abandonment of this unequal struggle will be the best thing for Russia because they want trade to open up again, because the government is no longer in favor of like the more right-wing party. I think some left-wing people are now in power and they want to treat with the Soviets. Now there's this international pressure as well. This is 195. I'm not like a huge guy on Churchill. I have problems with Churchill, especially World War II, but whatever. Churchill is in support of the White Russian army and nationalism, and he says, but this is from Lloyd George, who is the prime minister: "It was highly important for the British Empire that all trade with Russia should be resumed with as little delay as possible." Lord George went on to record that Britain would in no way support any anti-Bolshevik action by the forces of General Wrangel. It's just so fucked, you know, where it's like if Europe threw their weight around here and they all went after the Soviets, like they could have just nipped so many fucking problems in the bud, man. But it's about fucking money, right? It's about fucking money. And it's just like I don't know, they don't give a shit. Yeah, that's fucked. It's hard to read about, but there you go. 207, there's just this mention of Wrangel being followed by this bishop, Bishop Benjamin, who with cross in hand blessed the infantrymen as exploding enemy shells showered everyone with fountains of black dirt. I just like that. I like the image of that. I think that's great. So while Wrangel and the White Army, they're bottled up in Crimea, there's also Poland is fighting off the Soviets right now, and like the fate of Poland is hanging on by a thread. by Wrangel is drawing like Russian forces that would be going to fight Poland over to him. So that's good, and they have this really great victory. Jaloba, Jloba. And that's another thing where Denikin was very like a anti-Republican. Or sorry, he's a Republican, but he's also like not willing to give other like Russian territories their independence. Like I know the Cossacks wanted some more independence, and Denikin was completely opposed to that. And also like Poland, I think like Ukraine was splitting off. I think like Georgia, and he was like very anti all of that, so he made things difficult with that as well. 228, Wrangel launches a major effort in the Kuban region, and this is where the Kuban Cossacks are from, but this is also a major setback for Wrangel. He appoints a general there, and this guy he kind of screws up. It's like a really difficult to pull off plan, but it is a failure. But the only positive is they get about 10,000 Cossacks fleeing from Red occupation, and they get several thousand horses to join back. Because that's also a problem where the Soviets have like infinite everything, and they just don't. So they've run out of horses at this point. On August 20th, like the Americans are talking with Russia. You know, they're trying to like feel each other out, you know, to get some aid and everything. There's this note about this Admiral Macaulay, who personally took over 30 orphans who were brought up and educated in the USA at his own expense. So that's nice. That's something, right? That's something. Wrangel takes a gamble to, I think they're in South Ukraine because they need grain. They need everything because they just don't have enough to feed the army in Crimea. And so he gambles pretty well with like this battle, and he loses. But I think the only solution was just the other option was staying in Crimea, and then you just slowly starve to death. Like you're not going to win from that position. So I don't know. Some people criticize him. The book talks about that, but I think it makes sense that you have to take that gamble, right? Because you are just losing the war of attrition. Like it's not even close. The French, like the British, were initially very sympathetic to Russia, but then the left-wing cabinet comes in. These guys are in a great hurry to disperse and forget the Russian army. So the Russian army does leave Crimea. They do get put around a few places like Constantinople and here and there, but no one really knows where to send them, right? No one really knows where to send them or what to do with them. And the French start siding with the Soviets and just want it to be over. This is nice. Olga Wrangel on page 290. She goes to New York to raise funds, and Mrs. Vanderbilt. I've been to the Vanderbilt estate. It's really nice, dude. It is really nice. I'd recommend checking that out. And is that North or South Carolina? I don't know, but it's huge. It's insanely big. It's really cool. But Olga, she speaks at a reception, and she raises a bunch of money. You know, Wrangel's trying to keep the men together, even though they've been sent off to a bunch of different places. I think like Serbia, Hungary, maybe some in America, but they're just all been sent around. And then there's the Russian Grand Duke Nicholas, who's uncle of the late Tsar. Wrangel's trying to give the Grand Duke command dispersed Russian army. He doesn't want it initially, but he does take it. And this is just like they pool money together and like resources to help each other out, and like it's for education of the children, and it's all that. So it's this like really big support network. Page 298. So something that happened was that earlier there was like an attack on Wrangel's boat as he was like going around to visit different like army groups and everything. Like when they're out of Crimea, like he would go around to like different camps where his men are and visit them, and his boat got rammed by this other boat, and it was very deliberately like an assassination attempt. On page 298, Wrangel becomes suddenly ill, and he dies a few days later, and apparently his last words are, "Lord save the army," and moments later, "I hear church bells." And there are masses sung in every country where Russians had settled, from major centers, Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Sofia, Belgrade, to obscure villages in the Balkans and grimy coal mines in Belgium and France. It seems like he was poisoned. Like a lot of people allude to it, and it seems like, yeah, he really was. Nice, at least on 302, they talk about his tombstone. Wrangel's associates and lieutenants discussed what inscription the marble plaque of his grave should bear. Unanimously, they agreed on just 2 words, General Wrangel. Any other words would be superfluous. But if indeed a epitaph was needed, then surely Rompo non plecto, I break, I do not yield. The Wrangel family motto would have served the purpose. So there you go. It's a good book. It's you get more background on like Wrangel. You get different points of view, which is more than Oath the Honor has. I learned a lot about this period of history, and like there's more stuff I want to learn about, like Catherine the Great. Like that's interesting. The Odessa evacuation, that's interesting, and even just like more about like the White Russian Army. This book does a lot. It's really good. I hope Tsar Press comes back so people can read from them again, hopefully sometime soon. I will say maybe some parts I didn't love, where it's kind of like a military focused book, which obviously it is, but some of the like battle scenes and like writing out all, and then this army unit did that and this army unit did that, it's a little dry and not super interesting. But overall, I really like it. I recommend it. Unfortunately, you cannot fucking buy it, and I don't recommend Gates of Fire. So that's annoying. Anyways, I should have 2 more indie books to review this weekend. That's hopefully. But I'm trying to get a movie review done. Probably like a sci-fi thing. And that'll be done this weekend. I might push back the indie book review. I'll finish it this weekend, but it'll be uploaded sometime during the week next week. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching. Dr. Infinity out.
Here's 40 shillings on the drum to those who volunteer to come to list and fight the foe today, over the hills and far away, o'er the hills and o'er the main, through Flanders, Portugal and Spain. King George commands and we obey, over the hills and far